Okay. So the questions, I hope you received it.
Yes.
Um, okay. So, can we, if it's in front of you, then the first question is with the usage of pesticides in fields and farms, children living there, how are they now being protected from harmful chemicals, from being exposed to them through either their it should be guardian, sorry for the spelling error, or from the field?
And so what's the word? Is it guardian?
Yes, guardians.
And what do you mean by that word?
So basically, either of their parents or whoever is taking care of them. So they could be with a parent, could be with grandparents. So I use the word guardians. Yes. So not assuming that they are a family.
Right.
Yeah. So whoever's working in the field, and also. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, okay. So basically, by this question, I mean that when the parents are working in the field, or whoever the guardians are, they're exposing themselves to the chemical through their protect themselves with different garments, but then there is a certain amount of exposure they come with, walk in with at home, and when the children are living in the same environment where the farming is taking place, they may be a little far from there, but to a certain percentage they are being exposed. So what is being done? How are children being protected from that?
Okay, so I know about ways that our government here in the U.S. tries to ensure that they're protected. And we have pesticide laws. There's something called the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act that requires testing prior to the approval by EPA for each pesticide and each way that it's used. And so this pre-approval testing includes the requirement for information of health effects. So what kind of health effects the chemicals might cause. And their potency. In other words, which ones are more toxic than others. And data is required for the general population, and this also includes sensitive subpopulations, such as pregnant women and children.
Mm-hmm.
And testing also requires information on exposure pathways. So for each chemical use, how might they be exposed through ingestion, dermal if it gets on their skin, or inhalation if they breathe it in. And this testing must be done for each pesticide use. So for each way the pesticide is used, you need to have information on exposure pathways. And in addition, there's something called the Worker Protection Act, or the Worker Protection Standard, and it requires farm managers to comply with this standard and train all their workers and post signs in and around fields. And this is designed to minimize pesticide exposure to those in and around the farm, and this includes children.
Okay. That's great to know. Thank you for that. And so we're through with the first question, so now you can move to the second one.
Sure. So it says due to environmental exposure, it can cause gene mutation. How are pregnant mothers and their children affected from the exposure? And do they suffer from genetic mutation? So again, this human health testing that's required by EPA prior to a pesticide to be registered for each use, it includes testing for gene mutations. And this is done through in vitro tests, and these are cell bioassays, such as the Ames assay, and it's also through animal testing. And the animal testing includes multi-generational tests to evaluate effects on offspring. And I think you know that gene mutation is a major risk factor in tumor formation,
Yes.
which is cancer.
Yes.
And And as testing of pesticides on humans is generally considered unethical, in vitro tests done in the test tube like these cell assays, and animal tests are used to infer effects in humans. And in addition, there is clinical and epidemiological evidence that children may be more susceptible to certain cancers as a result of chemically induced gene mutations or altered gene expression in the mother. Pesticide use practices are allowed that are not likely, this is a very low probability, to result in exposure to farm workers, their families, or the general population that would result in cancer as a result of gene mutation. So even though some pesticides may test positive, and many chemicals do test positive in the Ames assay and even in animal testing, the laws that regulate pesticides and how they're used are done in a way to minimize exposure. So no one is exposed to levels that would have more than a very, very tiny likelihood of causing cancer.
Okay, so more or less, what you're saying that the chemicals are tested and they are made sure that it is causing the minimal risk.
Yes, exactly.
Minimal risk, but so in case of any kind of exposure, of course, it's a risk. Like you don't know how a certain body might react to the exposure. Some are sensitive, some some are less sensitive, and we'll get to that in one of these other questions. We'll talk about that. Sure. And
so the next question is, how is the air they breathe monitored and assessed for chemicals? How to determine when air is safe to breathe in? So.
I'm sorry, another spelling error from my side. It should be assessed. ASSEEDD. I wrote this question in a hurry, so I forgot. Right. I could have checked for the errors.
Okay.
Yeah. How are they assessed for chemicals?
Right. So again, there is testing prior to EPA registration, requires information on a pesticide's environmental fate associated with each pesticide use. This includes a pesticide's tendency to be volatile. That means a tendency to produce vapors that are available for inhalation. Pesticides can also attach to dust. And so inhalation exposure can be to the pesticide vapor or to pesticides absorbed onto dust particles small enough to enter the lungs.
Yes.
So exposure is also determined by human behavior. So how much time is spent indoors or outdoors near a pesticide application site. And so once you know how much human behavior what the expected human behavior is close to an application site, then you can estimate what the level of exposure might be based on how much is in the air they breathe or how much is absorbed onto the dust they breathe. And then you compare that exposure to something called the pesticide's reference dose. And the reference dose is the amount that can be consumed daily without deleterious health effects. So you determine a dose in humans that you could consume every day of your life that would be without any adverse health effects. And so this amount is derived from animal testing. So you use something called the no adverse effect level in animals. And then you apply uncertainty factors to further reduce the acceptable level in humans. And these uncertainty factors take into account what you mentioned earlier, that we're all different, and some of us are more susceptible than others, or could be.
Yes.
And then additional factors may be added to address concerns about sensitive subpopulations, such as children.
Yes.
So EPA developed something called this reference dose, which is the dose that causes no harm. And this can be looked up for every pesticide, either in EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs database, or there's also another database called the EPA information, the IRIS database. Okay.
And okay, thank you for that. That makes sense. I mean, it's like every children, they are one of the most vulnerable population. So I think the main goal of these chemicals, like when you're accessing them or when you're utilizing them, making sure that it is doing the least damage. But of course, the sensitive population, we I mean, what along with how the protection is being given. So, are there any kind of my follow-up questions to what you said would be, what kind of let's say, like, is a doctor present inside if some emergency happens? How is that looked upon?
So as far as seeking medical attention,
Yes.
there you can.
Like, what options are given to them? Like, what are they? How can they protect themselves in case some emergency happens? In case, say, a child just, like, of course, all these chemicals are kept aside away from children. I would hope so, but
Right.
in case
And
they.
so the poison centers, we have poison centers in each state.
Mm-hmm.
And the poison centers, and they're generally at one of the major hospitals in each state.
Mm-hmm.
And that poison center number is widely known. And so if you call the poison center with an emergency about any chemical,
Mm-hmm.
They're trained to provide appropriate advice over the phone and then help you seek medical attention if you think it's necessary.
I see.
And that's for any chemical, not just pesticides.
Yes, for sure. And then also, okay, thank you again. And for the last question, how are agriculture practices monitored through which it can be deemed safe for people and children to consume, and who monitors it? So,
So are you talking about consuming food that has pesticides on them?
Yes.
And so EPA establishes the allowable amount of pesticide residues on food at harvest.
Mm-hmm.
And this is called the food tolerance in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the maximum residue level in the rest of the world. It's legally enforceable. Food tolerances are established by EPA at levels that are consistent with good agricultural practices. In other words, the practices of pesticide use that will result in efficacious pest control while minimizing impact on human health and the environment. Mm-hmm. So every pesticide label has information on it about how to apply that pesticide, mm-hmm. when and where and how often and how you apply it. And if you follow those directions, those are considered good agricultural practices. So tolerance levels are set so that if good agricultural practices are followed, mm-hmm. they will not be exceeded. And so now you have an allowed amount of the chemical on a crop at harvest. So when you combine estimates of what we eat each day on each crop that we might eat, pesticide food tolerances generally result in an estimated human exposure that is well below that reference dose that I mentioned earlier, which is the level that's without deleterious health effects. Mm-hmm. And then EPA and USDA and FDA mm-hmm. all have shared responsibility for monitoring the food supply, mm-hmm. as well as imported food for pesticide residues.
I see. So they're the one who makes sure that the allowance limit is not exceeded and it is safe for public and human consumption.
Right. And USDA publishes a book on pesticide data that is available online mm-hmm. that shows some of the monitoring data, and rarely are these tolerance levels exceeded in crops. It's reasonably uncommon in this country.
So, what are the recommendations and what are the ways can we? So, when we bring, say, we buy food from the grocery store and then we bring it, and obviously we are recommended like we wash it, run it under cold water for at least 15 minutes. But is water enough, or is there any other ways like say baking soda and vinegar, washing it with that? Are any recommendations such as them?
So,
is water enough?
Washing your fruits and vegetables is going to remove what residues that might be very loosely bound to the surface of the fruit or vegetable. They might be on the dust or the dirt that's still on the fruits or vegetables, and that's really all you're doing. Many pesticides, when they're applied to fruits and vegetables, between the time they're applied and between the time you receive them in the store, they've had time to start to move into the surface waxes on the fruits and vegetables, and they're really there's a fair amount of residue that's not available to be washed off, even with some of the commonly found techniques on the internet. In addition, many fruits and vegetables receive a coat of wax after they're harvested. So this is an artificial layer of wax that's put on fruits and vegetables. Mm-hmm. And once that happens, then now the residues are covered with wax, and you're not going to wash them off with any of the techniques that you read about online. So it's a good idea to wash your fruits and vegetables to get the dirt and maybe pathogens off the surface, and oftentimes that's going to remove some residues that are loosely bound to the surface, but it's not going to remove all the pesticide residues.
So is there any method, any procedure that can remove it, or once it's...
Well, some fruits and vegetables you peel, and if you peel those fruits and vegetables like a banana or citrus, you're going to remove most of the residues when you peel it off. Or if you have a cucumber, and cucumbers are often waxed, so after they're harvested, to preserve them between harvest and when they arrive in the stores, and you can peel a cucumber and you're going to remove most of the residues.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. So, are the pesticides provided to each vegetable and fruit equally, or do each vegetable require a different amount of pesticides?
Every crop usually has multiple pesticides registered on the same crop, and so what really matters is there's some pesticides that are used very early, when the crop is planted very early, and the edible portion of the crop is never exposed to the pesticide. And if they're not systemic, if they don't move around in the plant, they're never going to get to the edible portion. So not every pesticide that's used in agricultural production is going to be present in fruits or vegetables. It's generally the ones that are used closer to when the product is harvested where the most concern is.
And there are certain foods such as spinach that are in the market that the pre-washed and triple washed and all that. Those do you recommend still washing it when you bring it home, or is that safe to eat right off the box?
Well, either way, you're only going to remove the really loosely bound material that's on the surface. And again, this could be dirt, dust, pathogens, and maybe a small amount of pesticide.
Okay. The pesticide is still added in that, even though it says pre-washed?
There's probably going to be less of those substances on the surface.
Okay. Okay. These are good to know, because it's like when you are it's like consuming food that has potential chemicals in it, and knowing how to keep yourself safe and the public safe, and what you need to do that. Awareness creation is very important. I think one of the biggest goals of public health is creating awareness so that more people are they know how they can protect themselves and cause the least damage within themselves. And so yeah, these are just general questions from my side. But yeah, okay, that makes sense. That's good to know that, it's like a lot has been taken and done to make sure, children are protected and options are given to them. So that, I think, helps them in the long run, at least keeping them safe from anything big or bad happening. But okay, great. Thank you so much for your time, and
Welcome.
I will keep in touch with you in case I run into more questions, or I may need more help in this project.
All right.
Okay, thank you.